Lovely to see you again, guys. So, our last conversation was regarding the compelling evidence for the harvesting of the Earth's original energy grid in us. And this conversation, Michelle has compiled an absolutely fantastic presentation again, titled Michelle.
The destruction, exploitation, and reverse engineering of the Earth's original energy grid system.
Fantastic. So we've got a lot of information to get through here, guys. Adam, again, has got some fantastic finds. Michelle's really going to be guiding us through this one, with Adam having a massive input as well, myself putting inputs where I can. But to start with, I just wanted to touch on something regarding reality itself and nature itself. We're talking about the grid. And one of the things I wanted to speak about is the illusionary reality of nature itself. You know, when we're talking about trees and things, it might be hard for people to grasp what we're talking about, especially in relation to a circuit board Earth, etc. Obviously, we look outside and we see what we see, don't we? It's very hard to grasp the concept. So what I'm talking about ultimately is trees that not appear as what they are. You know, ultimately they're receivers, transmitters, storage, they hold memory, they're generators of energy. So all these components on the Earth, we've got to remember, aren't as what they appear, the same as us. And you know, one of the things that one of my experiences I had when I experienced all is one was that we're all the same thing. Energy runs through us all. So Michelle's going to be talking about inner chi in different things, and chi itself has got so many different names. You know, throughout cultures they call it prana, life force. People argue just over the name of it. That's besides the point. Ultimately, for me, everything is made of this same material, chi, energy, whatever you like. And in relation to the Earth and us, we're a mirror of each other. We're fractals. So when we're talking about meridians, it's all the same things. So we can be harvested just the same as the Earth. We're essentially batteries, energy, which can be harvested, manipulated, or empowered. And, you know, we're just going into the grasps of all this now with stadiums, sports fields, all types of entertainment of all sorts. Not just that, the harvesting and mining of the Earth and the hidden nature of all of our history and our true selves.
You know, this has just been an amazing journey. And, you know, with both of you on being able to work together like this, because our different skill sets really do complement each other. And you'll be seeing that in the course of this video, because trees weren't on my radar until Chad brought them to my attention. And we went into depth in our first conversation back, I guess, a month or so ago. And now I see trees everywhere. So it's definitely something literally that's coming out of the woodwork right now. And it's really interesting because we're all, you know, doing our own research. And, you know, I know with my own research, and some of this I did years ago, it's starting to come into focus a lot more clearly. And we'll be talking about that today on some of those things. So it's very, very validating in that respect. I wanted to start with a correction that somebody brought to my attention. It's the right location. And in the last conversation, I mentioned that Haven for Hope homeless shelter is in Houston, but it is in San Antonio. And this is actually the Haven for Hope in San Antonio. And it just came out Houston. So for whatever reason, I was remembering that the wrong city, but it is the correct place. So I just wanted to mention that by way of correction. And go ahead and dive into the main presentation today. So this is a follow-on to our last conversation directly. And if I could have put everything together in time, I would have. But there's a lot more information in this one coming forward. So it's a natural follow-on to what we were talking about in our last video, which was the compelling evidence for the harvesting of the grid. In this conversation, we're going to present considerable evidence for the destruction of the components of the Earth's original grid system. For example, giant trees and trees in general, the exploitation of the components of the grid system through the examples of the mining and lumber industries, evidence for a theory on how it was destroyed and who destroyed it, and evidence for where and how the Earth's energy grid system was reverse engineered, and where and to whom all of our harvested energy, also known as inner chi, might be going. This collaborative effort started initially when Chad invited me to have a conversation with him about giant trees. Though our methods of discovery are different and our working beliefs are different, we were coming across exactly the same findings in our research. We discussed our different perspectives concerning man-made versus natural, and in the course of the conversation, we found common ground upon which our ideas merged together. Chad's excellent video editing of our conversation included clips from the movie Avatar. I referenced the two-part Bonanza correlation of mines and minerals to the Earth's grid system series I recently uploaded in that conversation. And I originally uploaded it 3 years ago as part of a 4-part series. After my conversation with Chad, I decided to merge the original 4-part series into 2 parts and re-upload it. In the course of updating the Bonanza series, it became abundantly clear to me that Avatar's Pandora and Earth are one, and the same in terms of what has taken place here with regards to indiscriminate mining and the destruction of trees and the ecosystem in the process. Not only that, this particular line of research connected directly back to the conversation I had just had with Chad about things like giant trees. Then our friend Adam contacted me with regards to his findings about the grid system and ley lines in both the conversation that I had with Chad, as well as my mine and mineral findings, which resulted in the first part of this deeper conversation with Chad, Adam, and myself about our joint findings. And again, that was called Compelling Evidence for the Negative Harvesting of the Earth's Original Energy Grid System and Us. And now we're going to present our findings for the destruction, exploitation, and reverse engineering of the Earth's original energy grid system. So I'm going to start with giant trees and goldfields of the Sierra Nevada mountains that straddle the states of California and Nevada, and then talk about findings of lumber industries and a possible giant. I found these places along a long-distance alignment I was tracking in 2 directions from the starting point of Cape Farewell, Greenland, because Cape Farewell sits on an alignment that globally connects with 2 different sides of the North American star tetrahedron that I found early in 2016 by connecting the dots when I noticed major cities in North America that were lining up in straight lines. I found the Nalonak gold mine in Cape Farewell, Greenland, which was Greenland's first gold mine that opened in 2004, where there was a narrow vein, high-grade gold deposit that produced 308,000 ounces of gold in the 4 years that it was mined. So what we are told is that the gold deposits found in these veins are formed when hot water or fluids flow through cracks deep in the Earth's crust. But what if the root systems of trees have something to do with it? And so now we're going to kind of dive right into that idea. Along these lines, in part 1 of Bonanza, the alignment I was tracking went right through the part of the Sierra Nevada mountains known as California's Motherlode Country on the western slope of the Sierra Nevadas. I had just finished the research for my conversation with Chad on giant trees, so I knew that the giant sequoia redwoods of California were located in the Sierra Nevada mountains and are the only living trees of this species left on Earth, and itself currently listed as an endangered species with less than 80,000 trees left, and they are under continual fire threat. So I sent Chad the map of the Sierra Nevada goldfields to see if it matched the location of the giant redwoods, and he got back to me right away that the goldfields were not in the location of the redwoods, but very close. So thanks for doing that, Chad. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to kind of go into something here, and then we'll kind of see what you guys think. So before the logging industry came to California in the early to mid 1800s, there were an estimated 2 million acres of old-growth forest containing giant redwoods. If 2 million acres of old-growth forest were estimated to have been cut down, with less than 80,000 trees left today, then there likely were trees where the gold of California's mother lode country was historically located. So of course they're not going to advertise that. And so there's, lots of photos available about, these giant trees being cut down during that time period.
Yeah.
It's not hard to find them at all. And then I put the map there on the left of the historical location of the redwoods, and you can kind of see like there's this whole area of, nothingness there. So I think there's a lot that they just don't want us to know about this. And the interesting thing is, once you start looking around, the evidence is really everywhere. And I know, Chad, you just took a trip down to Devon not too long ago, and did your first live down there. And you saw some interesting things down there too, didn't you?
Yeah, it's the same story everywhere, isn't it? These locations seem to be plagued by the same things, and we find the same things. That's huge rocks, previous quarry locations, railways. The landscape and the terrain, it just speaks for itself. In your locations, like in Devon, it's the Dartmoor Park which sticks out to me. The Dartmoor National Park. I've been speaking to Ad about it a lot. It's a huge location. I'm going to do a future video on it. But in terms of across the pond to America, your kind of locations, they almost make ours look like babies. It's staggering when you look at it, and it's so easy to see the grid compared to the UK. I find it, and in terms of the scale we're talking humongous. And I think you're exactly right with what the correlation you're making with the gold. And other precious resources. I mentioned it in a previous video, the Mother Earth video. I believe the majority, if not all, of our resources come from an organic substance, whether that be tree or something else. So the gold veins that we're finding, as you showed with the photo, they look mirror image to kind of tree roots. Veins. Again, we've got this fractal reality going, haven't we? This Russian doll mirrored reality going through everything, the same kind of pattern. But I've come across these photos as well, and they're staggering, aren't they? Some of you've got to find the real ones, and even the real ones, they're staggering. They're just it gives Avatar its perspective of truth. It gives some value to things like that without us just talking. Because it's hard to find that proof anymore. These are the bits of evidence that we can show people.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Once you put the tree into the picture and the lengths that the controllers have gone to eradicate this information completely, it's mind-blowing. And puzzle pieces just start falling into place. And where I live in kind of central North Arizona, since this has come on my radar, it's like I'm looking around at the mesas and all this other stuff around me now completely differently. I can't grasp what happened to the trees. But in Jerome, which isn't far from where I live, there's a pyramid called Cleopatra Hill. I mean, it's clearly a pyramid. It's got a big mine next to it and historical mining there. In the Black Hills, and so there's pyramidal shapes there. You can see the pyramids, but you can also see these massive rocks. And because I was seeing things from the man-made perspective, I'm like, okay, well, the ancients made these. I don't know how they made them, but this is intentional. But I can see stone trees there now. That would make sense. And to me, it seems like there was some kind of relationship between the ancient builders and the organic life of Earth, trees being a major one. And there was something in that relationship that was working together. And we're going to talk about trees on the grid as we go through this, and mining locations as well.
Yeah.
And how the correlation is there. So this is really big deal stuff, and we're pulling from our own research to put this together. And before Chad brought it to my attention, like I said, I didn't even think about it in these terms at all. And now things are just starting to make a lot more sense. So in the bigger picture. So to move on to the next slide, as I'm talking about in part 2 of the series that I did, I was tracking the long distance alignment across Northern Europe and North America in the opposite direction from Cape Farewell. And I came across a couple of locations with both mines and a thriving lumber industry. The first place I encountered was Sundsvall in Sweden, and its a port by the Gulf of Bothnia between Sweden and Finland. Sundsvall was said to have been chartered in 1621, and that Swedish industrialism started there in 1849, when a sawmill brought a steam engine-driven saw in, and it is still the center of the Swedish forest industry. I had done this series a couple of years ago, and then when I was redoing it, it was kind of like, flashing lights on it now. I didn't think anything of it the first time. So Sundsvall is the seat of Sundsvall municipality in what's called Västernorrland County. And on the subject of mining and minerals, the Saxberget mine is one of the mines in this county, of which Sundsvall's a part. And not only copper, lead, silver, and zinc are mined, there's also 4 other active mines, including mines for copper, gold, and zinc. So correlation with the lumber and the mines. Mm-hmm. And I also came across a historical lumber industry in Ottawa, which is the national capital of Canada. And what we were told is that Ottawa was founded as Bytown in 1826, and that Bytown came about as a direct result of the construction of the Rideau Canal, which was said to have been built by Lieutenant Colonel By and opened in 1832. And Bytown was said to have grown because of the Ottawa River timber trade. It was incorporated as a town on January 1st of 1850, and this was superseded by the incorporation of the city of Ottawa on January 1st of 1855. And again, we're banging up against that 1850 year again, which seems to be a big year in the historical reset. And then we're told that the first gold was discovered at El Dorado in 1866, a location southwest of Ottawa. And here's a map of mine locations from the Ontario Mining Association. So I've just got one more slide to show after this. So any thoughts on that part of the presentation so far? There are correlations.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, it's the same story, isn't it? We find the same things: the mines and the trees, the lumber. It's this harvesting on a mass scale, and I find it so sad. It's so sad. I don't know about, when we go to these locations and people are taking photos and they love it. They just love these locations, don't they? They just absolutely, and I find it so sad because I can see what it is. And it's beautiful. You can still feel the beautifulness, the energy that still goes in these places by all means, but you can also see and feel the trauma of these quarries, of all these places.
And then you multiply that exponentially when you realize what's taken place here.
Yeah.
With everything here, with life here, with the beautiful civilization that was in harmony and balance. It's like it's been harvested for profit. And, again, we're going to go into the reverse engineering as we go forward in this presentation. It's been for the benefit of the very few, and definitely not in our best interest whatsoever. It's quite painful to think about what's taken place. So, that's why, for me, doing this work is something I have to do. It's not an option not to do it. I can't have this level of awareness from the time that I started and not share it. That's my motivating factor. And having the skill sets that I do have. And then, in the journey, connecting with other people doing their mission, if you will. It's really quite exciting. What are your thoughts, Adam?
Yeah, I completely agree with both you, Michelle and Chad, especially with the connection with the trees on certain locations. Because the additional research I'm doing at the moment signifies that trees played a vital part on the grid system for the health of humanity. Because the research I'm actually doing is proving, that was how trees in certain locations were completely destroyed for the sole purpose of because people benefiting from the energies of the areas of the trees. So people are receiving beneficial earth energies, healing energies, incurable diseases, for example, in these certain locations. They're receiving free healing from nature. So as we all know, Big Pharma took over. And once they took over, anything that was natural, that was healing, they wanted to completely destroy for a specific reason, like you say, for the few people, so the general people didn't benefit from it. So there's a lot of that on there. And the additional research I'm doing, there'll be quite a lot of compelling evidence to actually prove that, because what I'm picking up on at the moment is absolutely coming through abundance of, unquestionable evidence that's coming up to prove that. So definitely.
Yeah. I'm getting that too.
And it's just a case of getting the message out there for people, raising the awareness, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like the dam is burst and the universe just wants this information to come back out.
It has, Michelle.
Absolutely. And the earth is supporting us because people like ourselves are open to the truth. If we search for answers, the answers just come to us from, pretty much immediately from an unexpected source. And that's confirmation that the universe and the grid wants that information to come through people like ourselves who are more consciously aware in order to get the truth out there, because truth is one of the most powerful vibrations. So that's what we're doing.
Exactly. One of my favorite memes that I've seen on, like Twitter is they thought they could bury us, but they didn't know that we were seeds. With a picture of, like a little weed coming up through a sidewalk crack, So, yeah, I mean, they can't suppress the truth forever, and it's starting to come out more and more. So in the very first video that you did, Chad, exploring the Mother Earth ley lines and trees, you talked a little bit about giants as well. And so it appears that there are potentially giants on this grid as well. And so, like earlier, I mentioned organic materials being used. So there could possibly be a tie-in there, because this is named Sleeping Giant Provincial Park in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And the alignment I was tracking in the Bonanza series went right across this area. And here I found the presence of amethyst mines. And so a little bit different, but you've got your little place you can go in and get your amethysts. Pick your own.
Pick your own. Like strawberry.
And yeah, exactly. Pick your own gems. So I had to look around because not all views of that Sleeping Giant Park look like one, but this one kind of does. And then in this example of Thunder Bay amethyst, you see hematite inclusions, and they show up as the red color and the points there. So hematite is an iron oxide compound, and the name is derived from the Greek word for blood, which is long been associated with blood and magic. And so you talked about giants and amethyst and things like that in that video, Chad.
Yeah, like, lots of for people out there that are thinking, what the hell, You know, there is good scientific evidence for it. I think I might have already mentioned it. Walter Russell, just look at his expansion and compression cycles of how that could work in terms of things being larger and smaller. You know, it's brilliant science. But I think for me, it's clear as day. It's clear as day that with what we're talking about, a lot of the components, if we just look at our human body, you know, the components of the human body in a gigantic scale and what those would turn into under certain conditions. And we start finding precious gems and fuel or everything, essentially everything, every resource you can think of, you know. But these types of thought processes we only really see in fantasy. So it's hard for people to take fantasy and put it into reality because we've been told about it in myth, legend, now through fantasy book and movie. But there seems to be huge amounts of truth to this, and I just feel we have to look outside the narrative of what we've been told and outside the box. Do you know what I mean? And when you start to do that, it's not far-fetched, as you're finding, Michelle, as you know already, Michelle, as you know, Adam, you know.
And it's when you have a shift in perception that you can start getting more information and, you know, take it all in.
Yeah.
I believe that the Earth was intentionally terraformed and everything was precisely placed. You know, the ancients were master builders. And when I say ancients, I don't mean they just lived a long time ago. They are ancient humans and they're still with us today. And they're the most persecuted people on the Earth.
Can I just say, Michelle, that what you're saying isn't far-fetched anyway? Look at the Earth to the sun or whatever, if you believe in that. They say it's precisely placed, it's perfect. The human body, why is the heart where it is and the mind, the brain where it is and the feet so many? It's all perfectly placed, isn't it? You're spot on. Sorry, you're spot on. I just wanted to give you more examples.
Yeah, and there's not all one thing or the other, but we can take different schools of thoughts, you know, like the mud fossil community and, you know, all of that other stuff. And I don't believe it's all one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And you're introducing me to the giant trees as an example of that. Like I said, we came to common ground.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over a course of much longer periods of time than what we've been taught, that life was on Earth and civilizations existed far longer, that everything kind of came together perfectly in perfect alignment with the stars and on Earth, and people knew exactly where they were on the Earth. They weren't wondering if it was flat or round. They weren't wondering if it was who they were. You know, they didn't have all these distractions because, again, we're being harvested. All our energy is being harvested, so we don't focus on the inner side and our spiritual natures. So that's all been removed. So we would be putting our attention somewhere else. So all of that's just division. Every single school of thought that's out there, that's put out as the only one, is polarizing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you know, again, we're just giving our 2 cents worth into that whole big puzzle. And it seems like we each have a different piece of the puzzle to bring forward, but it all works together. And so in this next section, we're going to look at the whole idea of Aleister Crowley and the Philadelphia experiment ley line. And I don't know how many of you know who Aleister Crowley was. And how this kind of tied together some things that I've believed for quite some time, but I didn't have any physical evidence. And I wanted to share physical evidence that I found recently that I absolutely believe there's something to this, or I wouldn't be putting it out there ever. It sounds crazy, but it's not any crazier than what's actually taken place here, which is off the charts insane. So how did they do it? How could they have done it? So this is a possibility. And, you know, if I'm going to say this, I got to make it compelling, right? So this is, again, going to bring in all 3 of our areas of research and expertise. It does work together. I've long believed that Aleister Crowley, nicknamed the wickedest man in the world, was a major player in what has taken place here on Earth, and that the Philadelphia experiment was involved somehow in how the Earth and its energy grid system was hijacked by the controllers and negatively reverse engineered for the benefit of the few instead of positively for the benefit of all life everywhere. I found the first physical evidence to support this belief when I was doing the research several months ago for recovering lost history from the estuaries, Pine Barrens, and Elite enclaves off the Atlantic northeast coast of the United States. I first came across the existence of a man named Aleister Crowley in the Book of Lists, which was first published in 1977, which was about the time I was reading this particular book as a teenager. I can't remember which lists he made, but he made several, as I recall.
It's quite interesting, Michelle, just noticed that the book of the Almanac, wasn't that the magazine, the book that was used in the Back to the Future series with the reports results? Was that a change of timescale? Was that reference to it? Was that used deliberately in that movie as well with the name Almanac? It's just something that comes up when as soon as I saw that image, reminded me of the Back to the Future film. So
you like that movie?
That wasn't a coincidence. That was used in that movie as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good spot, mate. That's a bang spot.
And Back to the Future is probably the best example of predictive programming out there for 9/11. So yeah, there's lots of hints that they give us because they have to tell us.
Yeah.
Then somewhere in the years between 2013 and 2015, which was several years before I started doing my own research, I read several books by author and publisher Peter Moon. And Peter has a lot to say about Aleister Crowley in his books and the dark, occulted nature of the timeline that we have been living on. Peter has also been involved in a lot of work on the Moors, the Philadelphia experiment, the Montauk project, and time travel research. I started reading books he published because I was looking for information about the Moors after I had come into awareness of the Moors through a Moorish American friend when I lived in Oklahoma City between 2012 and 2016. And Peter was one of the few people even talking about them. In one of his books, and I'm not sure which one, it might have been Synchronicity and the Seventh Seal, Peter mentioned that on the day of the Philadelphia experiment, Crowley passed his baby son through the circular megalith at Menontoll in Morva, Cornwall, and that when he did this, it caused a line of energy to cross the ocean. I have encountered the date of July 22nd of 1942 for the original Philadelphia experiment, but there are conflicting dates given for this, including doubt that it ever took place. And before I go on, I want to touch base with you both. So Chad, isn't Dartmoor in Cornwall?
Yeah. It's not far from where I've just been. It's that place, yeah. I'll pull it up on the map for him.
Yeah, it's just further north to where Chad was. It's sort of North Devon, Cornwall area. Yeah,
okay.
Whereas Chad went to sort of central and south Cornwall. So it's all pretty much that same southwest part of the country. So it's all the same area.
And there's a lot of megaliths in Dartmoor, as I remember.
A huge
Not
amount.
just these, but others. And again, there you've got more in the name.
Yes.
And to me, it's just they've kept the people in the memory or the place is memorialized as the people. They don't say anything about the Moors, but they call the places where they built Moors. Where you find stonework all over the place.
Please, sir, I want some more.
With that part of England, from the storybooks, if you want to go from them, it's all to do with Jesus' uncle, that Jesus of Maria, and he was a tin merchant. And there's even stories of the tin for Solomon's temple coming from our little shores down there. So it's got a huge amount of history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Adam, what's your experience here?
Because I've got some experience on here, because when I talk about my evidence on Aleister Crowley, is I was having this conversation because I was working in his hometown of Leamington Spa, where Aleister Crowley was born. And one of the guys I was actually working with, he actually lived in a house that Aleister Crowley lived in, which I'll mention a bit later on. But I remember one of the conversations that we had with this guy. So he'd done his own research on Aleister Crowley, and this was when I was in my early 20s. So it was, over 20, pretty near enough 20 years ago when I actually had this conversation. And he too mentioned about the experiment that he did by putting his child through that center of that rock, through that hole, and and something happened on it. So there is certainly something. So especially when you mention it now, and that was a conversation that I had with someone 20 years ago. Whereas back then it didn't mean anything to me now, what it does now, but it recalled that specific memory. And that where I was actually working, there was a ley line going through, which is one of the ley lines that actually happens to pass through Aleister Crowley's house. So, it's all connected, and we're getting that information, and we're all putting it together basically to get it out there, because that information, the Earth wants that information out there, and through people like us, that's our job, to get that out there, to get the truth out to the people, because truth is always the most powerful and most prevailing frequency out there.
Absolutely. And more to come on what Adam's talking about as we go through this, how it all ties together with the research we're all doing. Before I go into my findings on what I am now calling the Philadelphia experiment ley line, here's some biographical information of what we are told about Aleister Crowley's life. The future occultist and ceremonial magician was born in 1875 in Royal Leamington Spa in Warwickshire to wealthy evangelical parents. His relationship with his mother was strained, and she herself described him as the Beast, which was a name for himself he particularly liked. His father died when he was 11. And as Adam mentioned, that's near where Adam lives. And you said something about that being about the only free parking, and it's frequently empty.
That's it, yeah. I've just went down there literally just the other week to have a look, and surprisingly went past it, and that space in front of his house where you see the blue car here, that space was completely empty. All the other ones were full, but that was empty. And the amount of times I used to go to that, was one of the nearest town centres to us, to go shopping or for a meal, for lunch or something like that. All the free spaces were taken, but there was always a space in one of these spaces in front of his house, and I was wondering why that was. And I did not know that one of these houses was the one where Aleister actually lived in. Even though I knew he lived in that kind of location, I didn't expect it to be that house. So, is there energy still residual in that house from Aleister Crowley that people didn't want to park in that parking space? Is that a possibility? And that's what I'm strongly trying to, thinking is the possibility. Because these days, free parking is always at a premium everywhere, in every city and every town. So, the chances of that space always being available is pretty much not a coincidence, but a synchronicity of some kind. And what's the reason behind it?
Lots of interesting threads going to come out here. One of the schools Crowley attended as a young man was Malvern College in the Malvern Hills, and the anomalies about which Chad has looked into recently based on information from one of his viewers. So what are your thoughts about that, Chad? Again, all this stuff is coming up synchronistically.
It's crazy.
Getting ready for this.
It's crazy. I have a subscriber email me about Malvern. She only gives me a little bit of information, to be honest. I do the research, then I tell you, and you're doing your research about Aleister Crowley, and it turns out that he went to Malvern College, which is the research I'm doing at the time, and then Adam's got links to it. Yeah, but it's synchronicity beyond anything. Malvern, if anyone has not watched the Malvern video, is how can I compare the location? It seems to be an old a tree location that has been harvested, and it seems to be a key point on the grid again. The Malvern College seems to has links to this location, and there's said to be an underground base and a lot of military naval operations. Adam sent me some stuff on UAVs. There's UFOs been saw. But cut a long story short, the Malvern College has got its own Illuminati, Illumini. Aleister Crowley attended there. But interestingly as well, when you told me that, I researched a little bit further, and the CIA director, James Jesus Angleton, who was a CIA director, also attended the Malvern College. Quite a few other significant people, but we'll find this across the board. All these particular schools are gateways, or definitely have associations to the higher levels of society that are in control, almost like breeding grounds or gaining grounds of particular people. These colleges and schools seem to be.
Adam?
Yeah, I agree with what I said, because these places are seen as programming centers, because the energies are naturally a lot stronger in these particular locations, especially like Oxford, for example, or Malvern College. And one of the reasons is when the energies are higher, the brain waves tend to be at a much higher frequency, so they tend to be more in the alpha frequency instead of the theta. So basically that makes programming a lot easier, because if you studied at this particular college, for example, whatever is being taught to you at the time, because of the brain is naturally surrounded by the environment where the energy is a lot stronger, that automatically goes into the subconscious mind. So the information is retained within that subconscious, you know, as a permanent record, basically. So that's probably one of the reasons why colleges with their geometry and material and locations are chosen, and certain candidates study at these certain colleges for whatever purpose, you know, their intention is, I feel.
Makes you wonder when C.S. Lewis goes there and he's writing about magical creatures. I loved those books when I was growing up. Chronicles of Narnia.
I'm pretty sure there's access. It's just a case of finding and improving that. But I'm 100% sure that some of these majority of these locations have further underground connections to God knows what, because we haven't been there, but the evidence is suggesting that.
Maybe Narnia didn't come from his imagination, right? we don't know. But he was there. And there's a lot
of all these buildings remind you of, like you say, you know, Harry Potter, you know, what we mentioned before as well, you know, the shape of them, the spires and everything like that. The towers all resemble that kind of same thing.
And add portals and gates. We've spoke about this, and even these laboratories, you know, CERN and things like that. That these underground, you know, they're all doing similar type things. And for me, it's almost ripping the fabric or changing, like the Philadelphia experiment, changing the fabric, ripping the fabric of time and reality. And ultimately, it would create a portal or a gateway, wouldn't it? And the best way to describe that and hide it might be to say, open a wardrobe and walk through it. It's another analogy, a metaphor of what we're saying is going on in these locations. So, you know, it's like they use some of these people to write the story in a great way, what is really going on. Do you know what I mean? And just fantasize it and have these characters with all this truth underlying over a narrative.
Lots of things to think about, and we'll give you some more as we go through this. There are many details to find online about Crowley's controversial life and times, so I'll cut to the chase. He was highly involved in Freemasonry and in ceremonial magical practices, including sex magic, and he was known to have been bisexual. He also assumed the title of Baphomet within the Ordo Templi Orientis, also known as OTO, originally founded in the early 20th century by German occultists and modeled after Freemasonry. So, Chad, didn't you mention that in your journey you did kind of encounter some of this stuff?
Yeah.
And I said you have to know about this to know what's gone on here.
Like myself, like Adam and yourself, I came through Crowley, but mine was through, as I delved into every culture, I wanted to explore the dark side, you know, as well, and find out all about that. So I started reading the books and looking into different types of chaos magic and all because to understand what's going on, you've got a person center to understand it. So I delved a lot into Crowley, and a lot of what he was doing with the sex magic and things I'd already read about in a lot of books. It was ways to almost exhaust yourself to the point of releasing consciousness and all types of different techniques, and obviously related to spirits and demons and a lot of darkness there, because I was doing the white side of this, or the light. Obviously, he's the dark version of it. Every movie you've ever saw with Voldemort in Harry Potter and all of that, that's Aleister Crowley. That's the perception of Aleister Crowley, as you've said, the most evil man ever. Every dark magic movie is literally portraying this man here, who would do all types of stuff to small children, babies, of all types, all for his own purpose, for his purpose of himself and in his cult, to break the physics of reality and to summon all kinds of things, to take control, to manipulate. And he was at the forefront of that.
Adam?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I agree. Because just going back to one of the conversations that I had with this particular guy I was actually working with, because at the time, like I said, I didn't know much about Aleister Crowley, just from what he said. And one of the conversations that another conversation I recall having with him quite clearly, as if it was yesterday, was that he'd done a lot of his own independent research into Aleister Crowley, and apparently he got some really good information. I don't know how he managed to get hold of it, but he was actually telling me that, you know, this guy would have been, you know, spreading his seed, because obviously he was into these activities that he was going into. He would have had numerous kids, so he had numerous children, both daughters and sons. And he actually found evidence, because I think he showed me some evidence he found before at the time, which didn't mean anything to me, was that he was actually paying the mothers off. So even on the birth certificates, that the mother put the father of the child as being unknown, so even the child would not know that Aleister Crowley would have been their father or anything like that, because he was paying them off, and he was getting the mothers to sign a contract to say that they will not expose that information. And that was like some record that he found. I think it's someone on the record off one of the regional record offices, where he actually said he found that kind of information. So it just shows what kind of how trickery he used, and he didn't care as long as he was getting his evilness out. And one of those ways would have been to, you know, spread his seed and get more of his offspring out there, because they would have inherited his evilness and DNA, basically. So it didn't mean anything to me at the time, but now going back to it, it kind of thinks, oh, that would make perfect sense, being what kind of person he was, and to achieve what he wanted to achieve. I can't say that as being a fact. One can just say it's a conversation that I had based at a particular time. So, but it makes sense now. So that sounds more likely than less likely to me now.
Look at the A as well. Even the A, it just proves what kind of character, you know what I mean? Like, the A is a dick. Everything's sexualized. Everything. Can you see it? The all on the picture. The A is a knob.
Yeah, I see. Right next to his shoulder.
Yeah, everything's sexualized, like Ad's saying. He's you know, and I agree with you completely about spreading that seed, Ad. You know, and we don't know who they are. Like, you know what I mean?
They probably don't know who they are even today, or something like that.
Them just,
they would not know, basically, unless the mother decided to tell them secretly or something like that. So they could be literally spread all over the world. Could be in the UK, could be in the US, where he spent some of his time. You know, it could be literally found anywhere. It could be in your next, you know, someone's next door neighbour, for all we know.
What I would suggest
quite scary when you think
someone kept a track on it, though. You know, there'd be a list, and they would have. It's like the MK situation, isn't it? His offspring would have been perfect for further manipulation, further pushing, or leadership roles. So, you know, someone may have kept a little note on all those women they've paid off, and there's a little book out there.
And we've got a good example of this coming up here. It's interesting because I see this information about Aleister Crowley being quite relevant to what's going on today and the bizarre agendas that we see playing out. And the image on the left is what popped up when I searched for, they want to turn us into them. And then on the right is the image of us being in the image of God, which is antithetical to what the dark side wants. they want us transsexualized and, you know, confused, and that's their happy plan for us. And saying that 5 years ago probably would have been hard to back up, but not now. I don't know what it's like over there, but I know what it's like over here, and it's beyond crazy.
Yeah.
It is
What's
everything.
going on
Because I
with
just
that?
recently heard on one of the local stuff that basically they're trying to make it law in the UK, where if a parent, refuses to get, if a child says that, that they're a different gender or something like that, and the parents refuse it, they can literally steal that child off the parent in order to get them to do what they want to do, and that's trying to make it legal. And you think, well, what's the sense in that? When 10 years ago, if a parent said to a specialist, their child wants something mutilated because they're a different gender, they'll probably get put into jail or something like that. But these days, it seems like this is what's the normal thing, which is completely wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, I'm going to show you on the next one. This is the Baphomet that you see a lot. Male, female creature. And Crowley described the Baphomet as a divine androgyny and the hieroglyph of divine perfection. He also called Baphomet Father Mithras and the cubical stone, which was the corner of the temple. And we're going to talk more about the potential significance of this cubical stone as we go forward in the presentation. So again, it makes sense that this man is at the center of the world we live in today. And with all of its attendants, upside down craziness going on right now. With population being oblivious to it, and the part of the population that's awake to it and going, what the heck's going on here? and this guy lived it. He reveled in being called the beast. So at any rate, he claimed that he was honeymooning with his wife Rose Kelly in Cairo, Egypt, and he was contacted by a disembodied entity named Iwas, who provided him with the Book of the Law, which became the basis for Thelema, an esoteric and occult religious movement that Crowley founded in the early 1900s. And Crowley identified himself as the prophet of a new era of spiritual development for humanity. So what's interesting about the Book of the Law, do what thy will, that is the law. Did I get it right? Yeah. Isn't that what he says?
Yeah.
Essentially, do what thou wilt, that is the law.
Yeah.
He perverted free will. We live on a free will planet, whatever, plane. I'm leaning towards plane. They have to have our consent to do what they're doing. So they get it by lying to us. Do what thou wilt, that is the law. So we're sovereign beings, but he's totally subverted that whole idea into the most heinous crimes against humanity imaginable. Mm-hmm. I don't like to talk about the darker stuff that we talked about last time. I don't. But these roads lead there. You can duck. You can turn your head and say, no, I don't want to believe that. I don't want to go there. But we haven't even talked about the worst of it. And, in the first video, we talked about human hunting. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So these beings have completely corrupted everything that was meant for good and turned it into harvesting of everything. Blood, you name it. Blood, types of blood for their own consumption.
Can I offer a perspective, Michelle?
Sure.
One of the, as you say, it's just, everything's almost this horrible inversion, as you've already pointed out. Know thyself is the greatest thing, if you truly understand it, the greatest power you can ever have. But the problem comes when you know thyself truly, I don't know how to explain it, when you've not cleaned yourself properly. That's how I can only put it from my own experience. It can lead to this dangerous path. Because when you know what you are, which they've hid from everybody, they've then flipped it on their head to do whatever they want with it, simply because they know the secret. They've then turned to God when they're not God, but they're acting like God because they know the secret of reality. Once you know yourself and that power that you have, it's just, and then they manipulate us, and it's just, yeah. It can be, as you know, it can be used in two ways. I just see this as a really easy path to be taken. This is the, when you're not clean and you find truth and you go into the occult and you find and you dig and you dig and you find, this is what it brings: evil, corruption, nastiness, control, manipulation, because you then believe you are God. The highest of the highest truths gives you that type of power, that type of feeling. And if you think you're God, with that in place, it creates it's a very, it can be a very dangerous place, because these men are then acting like God for the whole of humanity. And they're not.
And leaving us out.
Yeah, leaving us out when we're God too, when we're all it's just like, we can know and you can't. Like, I don't know, yeah, but it's just bad, but
Yeah, I mean, it's quite fascinating. And hopefully this will just open more floodgates for more people to find out this stuff.
Yeah.
Behind it all. So there's a lot more details available to find out about Crowley's life, but two more points stick out for me. And one is that he was said to have spent mid-1919 on a climbing holiday in Montauk, located on the eastern tip of Long Island, and that he was said to have died on December 1st of 1947, and that his ashes were buried under a tree in Hampton, New Jersey, in the garden of German occultist Karl Germer. Hampton was the junction of the Central Railroad of New Jersey and the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad. So, again, the significance of being buried under a tree is interesting, supposedly. And the presence of a railroad junction here in Hampton. And also, I guess that's the main, and also his presence at some point in the early 20th century on Montauk. So I mentioned earlier Morva, Cornwall, and the Men on Toll megalith. So I'm going to go into my findings on what I'm calling the Philadelphia experiment ley line. And like I said earlier, in one of Peter Moon's books, he talked about Crowley passing his son through the circular megalith here, and that when he did that, it caused a line of energy to cross the ocean. So I think that took place on July 22nd of 1942. That was the first date I encountered in my research, and it just kind of fits in with other findings. I've long believed that there was a connection between the Philadelphia experiment and the creation of what I called a false 3D time loop, for lack of a better word, that mirrors or involves the figure 8 on its side of the Great Dragon Lines, which cross each other in two places, Bali in Indonesia and Lake Titicaca in South America, and that's located in between Peru and Bolivia. So this is Robert Kuhn's diagram of Earth chakras, and something you both may be very familiar with. Adam, what are your thoughts first?
Yeah, I believe like with the Earth chakras, they were originally naturally there, from whether it be from ancient giant trees or something like that, and then eventually man-made structures were put on these places replaced to it, or to amplify or divert the energy from these particular areas, creating additional energy lines running through it to feed the Earth grid, to maintain it for their own kind of purpose, to control collective consciousness is one of the main areas that they wanted to do. So it's, that manipulation that they had over the natural grid, and what's still happening today. So. And like I said, the Earth chakras, the Earth's got its own chakras, like you've identified on here, and the body's got its own chakras as well. And they're identical, basically, the same kind of chakras the planet has as the body, which shows that we are, all the same, and we are connected to the actual Earth and the planet as well, not it just being a physical structure or rock in space or whatever people describe the planet Earth as. We are part of that, and that's our connection. Our deep-rooted connection, and that's what they don't want us to have, basically, because they realize the power of having that connection to the divine through the Earth grid is too dangerous for them. Basically, they see that as a terror threat for them, because they realize the benefits that they can have and how it can benefit humanity as a whole.
Chad?
Spot on, Adam. I agree about it. Everything Adam said. So ultimately concluded it perfectly. Just an observation, obviously, as we all know, the pattern follows, it's a sine wave, isn't it? And like almost it's the sine wave, which we know the importance of that, especially in regard to manipulation, regardless of reality, the higher thing what it's doing to us. But sine.
And this diagram is actually how I landed on the idea of there being a connection between the years of 1492, which was the year of Columbus's first voyage, and 1942. So 1492 was the year of Columbus's first voyage and the fall of Granada in Spain, and the Moors in Spain. And 1942, midway through World War II, and the year of the Philadelphia experiment. Okay. So that was part of my synchronistic journey in my own research.
Amazing.
Also, the year 1942 is a numeric anagram to 1492, with 1717 as the midpoint year. When I started researching history from 1717, a lot of anomalies appeared in the historical narrative, including, among other things, the creation of the premier Grand Lodge of England in 1717. And it was around the same time that this was formed that they adopted the Anno Lucis calendar, which was based on the Anno Mundi, Bishop Ussher. The Earth was formed in 6006, something like that. So the Masons based their Anno Lucis on that 6006 year calendar. So basically I think you add 4,000 years, either 4,000 or 5,000 years to our date, and you come up with the AL date.
Michelle, just before you go off the emblem, I just want to say what I've noticed with the emblems, how I found the pattern in the sports field, sports circuit, etc. Every single badge and emblem and logo all fits upon the Masonic symbol in perfect coordinates. So whether they follow that as a basis, I found it in all football team logos. If you put the Masonic symbol on, it's like it's just based around it. If I was an artist, I would put the Masonic symbol down and then I'll draw patterns around it to try and hide it within it. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'll put it on the screen for people to see. I'll just put an array of logos and patterns on, and they will see that the Masonic logo is hidden in everything.
And it's actually vortex-based mathematics. It's the symbol for that, which is the creation, the donut, the torus, our energy bodies. It's showing. That's what that shows. So it's a sacred symbol that got co-opted.
But it's in our face, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's hidden in plain sight, in our face, in absolutely everything. But it's only those that see will know it and know the principles of it, which is what all these cults are hiding, isn't it? The higher virtues of man.
They've usurped it.
Yeah.
But they're not the creators of it, so they just know how to reverse that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's how they use it. So I want to present the first physical evidence I encountered that supports my belief that there was a connection between the Philadelphia experiment and what the heck happened here when I was doing research that turned into recovering lost history from estuaries, pine barrens, and elite enclaves off the Atlantic northeast coast of the United States. And a lot of interesting things came to light in the process of doing this research. A viewer suggested I look into a specific place on the Great Egg Harbor River in New Jersey. Swamps and bogs are not the first things that come to mind when I think of New Jersey, but those are the first things that jumped out at me when I looked up the place the viewer suggested. And I found a lot of noteworthy things in the New York, New Jersey estuary system and coastal pine barrens, and there's an accompanying fascination and interest the wealthy elites of American society have long had with this region. When I look specifically into the 3 places in the northeastern United States that have pine barrens, New Jersey, Long Island Central, and Massachusetts coastal, I noticed what appears to be a linear relationship between these 3 pine barren systems. And here's the linear relationship on Google Earth. When I searched for the pine barrens in New Jersey, Central Long Island, and coastal Massachusetts, and the pin is placed where that search term for each popped up and shows the proximity of Philadelphia to the New Jersey pine barrens, where the Philadelphia experiment took place in the naval yard there. And interestingly, there are abandoned trains and railroad lines found throughout the New Jersey pine barrens. So this is an old postcard showing the Atlantic City and Shore Railroad crossing a 2-mile or 3-kilometer long trestle bridge in the Great Egg Harbor Bay, and was part of an interurban trolley system in New Jersey that served this area between 1907 and 1948. And that service ended, we're told, because a hurricane damaged the viaduct in 1948, and it was too costly to fix it because people weren't using the trolley anymore. And then on the right with the Google Earth image, you can just see this whole coastline here. It just looks ruined. You know, and it's like, okay, we had the technology to build that across water. I mean, just lots of questions through here. And this is prime real estate. Yeah. I mean, scooped up by the elites. Why? So this is Long Island. Long Island's east end is comprised of 6 main townships: East Hampton, Southampton, which includes West Hampton, Shelter Island, Southold, Riverhead, and Brookhaven. And in the green there, you see the Pine Barrens. There are 3 named estuaries shown here: this Long Island Sound National Estuary, the Peconic National Estuary, and the South Shore State Estuary Reserve. And an estuary is defined as a partially enclosed coastal body of brackish water, which is water that is salty, dirty, and unpleasant, with 1 or more rivers flowing into it and a connection to the open sea. The towns of East Hampton and Southampton together are what are known as the Hamptons, another one of the historical summer colonies of the wealthy elite in our society. Before I move on to what I found when I looked here, I want to point out that Aleister Crowley's ashes were reportedly buried under a tree in another Hampton in New Jersey. Coincidence? Do you see what I see?
It's mind-blowing.
Just to point out later in the presentation that there is a Hampton I've identified of one of the ley alignments with Aleister Crowley in the UK as well, where it actually passes through a place called Hampton, which is famous for the royalty as well. So, you know, it's no coincidence why these places appear on both sides of the ocean, basically, connected with the same kind of agendas, if you like.
So we got a whole lot of Hamptons going on here.
Whole lot.
The Montauk Point Light is on Turtle Hill at the easternmost tip of Long Island, and the U.S. Army took over the lighthouse during World War II and opened Camp Hero, or Montauk Air Force Station, in 1942, adjacent to the lighthouse. Camp Hero on Montauk Point is alleged to be the location of the Montauk Project, a series of U.S. government projects with the purpose of developing things like psychological warfare techniques, like MK-Ultra, and time travel research, among others. The conspiracy theory Montauk Project was the inspiration for the Netflix show Stranger Things, which was originally billed as Montauk. Didn't you send me a Stranger Things thing this morning, Chad?
Yeah, because I was looking through this and I thought, I wonder if you saw Gates. That I did. It was a Stranger Things video around Gates on the Earth.
I haven't seen that one.
See, I've watched all the Stranger Things, and I think the reason why some of us are attracted to Stranger Things and other programs is because of the truth in it. You know, there's just this creepy, eerie truth about it, and it's exactly what you're talking about. Everything's shown in Stranger Things, the whole Montauk program, MK Ultra, you know, the Earth's grid, the portals and gates at particular locations, potentially other dimensional beings, lower entities, forces, if you like. Cool program.
They have to tell us what they're doing.
Yeah.
Also in the vicinity of the east end of Long Island, there was a known biological warfare laboratory on tightly controlled Plum Island, just offshore in Long Island Sound, called the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, just 17 miles or 27 kilometers southeast of Lyme, Connecticut, the place which gave Lyme disease its name. And Gardner's Island, a privately owned island by the Gardner family with more than 1,000 acres of old-growth forest, considered by some to be the largest old-growth forest on the northeast coast of the United States. It's a privately owned island. Right there, stab smack in the middle of it. The Brookhaven National Laboratory borders the Long Island Central Pine Barrens and is a U.S. Department of Energy laboratory. The research facilities of Brookhaven include the Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, RHIC, the first and one of two operating heavy ion colliders and only spin polarized proton collider ever built. It is also said to be the only operating particle collider in the United States, as physicists study the primordial form of matter that existed in the universe after what we are told was the Big Bang, a physical theory about an event that describes how the universe expanded from an initial state of high density and temperature. The world's other operating heavy ion collider is the Large Hadron Collider, also known as CERN, near Geneva, Switzerland. So I'm just wondering if these two work in tandem with each other. Kind of looks like a mirror image.
You know what I can see as well, Michelle? A sports field. It's track and field. You imagine people running around there now. 400 meters, let's go. It's like, oh days. Like, it just links more evidence towards the circuit board and all of that as well. Great spot, Michelle. Yeah, but they're definitely linked for me.
So just on that little bit of real estate there at the eastern end of Long Island, you've got a biological weapons laboratory, you've got Montauk Project location, and you've got Brookhaven. All in a triangular relationship, all close together.
Crazy.
So, you know, and when I was doing the research, finding all this, it's like I was seeing it just before everybody else was, because I didn't, and I knew a little bit, but I didn't know about all of this. And, you know, however we get our ideas, it's like, intuitive. I mean, it was all synchronistic and intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to that place in New Jersey because somebody said, hey, look at this, and that's all I was going to do. And then I just got sucked into the whole area when I saw the Pine Barrens and how they lined up. I was like, ooh, there's a lot more here to find. And, you know, kind of another breakthrough, if you will. And that's what happens. It's like there's a meta mind, we're all working together, and with our communities to, come to another place of understanding, like your Malvern video. And it's all ultimately tying together. And I've, been talking about the ruined land here. I mean, this whole area looks like it's submerged,
Yeah.
And I don't think it always was. This whole coastline throughout here, and even going down further. And this is prime real estate. If you're rich and famous, this is where you want to be. Back to the Gilded Age in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Moving along the Pine Barrens. Let me just summarize this just real quick. So we've got Plum Island, as I mentioned, Montauk at Camp Hero, Brookhaven, and when you have the psychological warfare, you have the time travel research, you have the high energy physics going on here. I'm going to tie it back to the Philadelphia experiment. Ong, or Ong's Hat, is a ghost town in the Brandon T. Byrne State Forest and the northern terminus of the Batona Trail, a 53.5 mile or 86.1 kilometer hiking trail through the Pine Barrens. So that's here, down here. So that's the general location there.
Did anyone not see that? Like on the last slide, do you not think that looks like the Eye of Ra up there and at part of the brain? Where the one pin is. To me, it looks like very much like the Eye of Ra. I can't see it properly, but like part of the brain as well.
So we're told that Ong's Hat was a work of alternate reality collaborative fiction, one of the earliest internet-based conspiracy theories that began back in the 1980s and embedded in various media to establish a backstory, like bulletin boards, Xerox mail art networks, and zines, and that author Joseph Matheny concluded the project. And in the background, you can see Moors here with their fezzes.
Mm-hmm.
So there seems to be a Moor connection somehow. The Ong's Hat tale is told about a group of physics and science professors from Princeton who ran chaos theory and quantum physics experiments from an ashram there to travel interdimensionally through a device called the Egg, and they were camped out in another world. So the story goes. The Egg was said to have been developed by these physicists and scientists as a sensory deprivation chamber and used by them to determine when a wave becomes a particle. One day, the Egg disappeared, and the young man within explained that in 7 minutes he was gone. He had traveled to an alternate dimension of the Earth. According to the story about Ong's Hat, these experiments continued over the years until the military threatened their research, at which time they moved entirely into the alternate dimension, only coming back for supplies. And so you see here at the bottom here, that looks like the Mandelbrot set, doesn't it? It sure does.
Yeah.
Ong's Hat, gateway to the dimensions. So yeah, in Lebanon State Forest. Fort Dix military reservations up here. Weren't you finding that in the Malvern Hills?
Yep.
Proximity of military bases.
That story for me is so true. The power of ourselves is just crazy, and they know that. And through certain techniques, whether that be trauma and all they're doing it, but we can do it ourselves and use it for our own purposes.
That's why they've thrown so much at us to keep that from happening.
Yeah.
Everything in our lives.
But Michelle doesn't turn into Superwoman. She already is, but still, you know what I mean.
It's like things they don't want you to know. Philadelphia is located in close proximity to Ong and the New Jersey Pine Barrens. Not far at all.
Mm-mm.
And so almost halfway through World War II, on July 22nd, 1942, the strange Philadelphia experiment was alleged to have taken place at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. So my question is, did the USS Eldridge just become invisible, or did it go somewhere else? And if it went somewhere else, where might it have gone? What was the real purpose of the Philadelphia experiment? And what if it went back in time and created a rip in the fabric of space-time? And again, and I'm setting the stage that this, this is like the perfect place for something like that to happen, with all of the, possibility of dimensional gateway and everything going on in Montauk and Brookhaven and all of that kind of thing. I mean, if they were going to do it, this is the place to do it. And predictive programming. There actually is a movie called The Final Countdown about a time-traveling naval vessel. In the form of the USS Nimitz, going back in time to the day before the attack on Pearl Harbor. I've not seen the movie ever, so this had no bearing on my theory, but it did pop up on one of my feeds. I'm like, oh, where'd that idea come from? So part of my journey going deep into this research, I was guided through a psychic friend in 2019 to look at Ireland in 1742 in my research. As we were visiting, she received an image of Ireland that was white, cold, and frozen on one side of 1742 and bright and sunny on the other. So I searched for what happened in the year 1742 on the internet, and only two things came up. The first was that Dublin, Ireland was the location for the premiere of George Frederick Handel's Messiah on April 13th of 1742. And the only other thing that came up was an extraordinary cold weather event in Ireland between 1740 and 1741, during which time the Irish population endured 21 months of bizarre weather without known precedent that defied conventional explanation. The cause was not known. So who shows up within a few years after the Great Frost of Ireland? One was Mayor Amschel Rothschild, who was born in Frankfurt in 1744. Just a couple of years after that took place. And he established his international banking business there. Adam Weishaupt was born in 1748, and he was the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati founder in 1776. He went to a Jesuit school at the age of 7 and was initiated into Freemasonry in 1777. Duke Francis of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld was born in 1750 and was the progenitor of the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, which seeded the lineage of the new royals, primarily through first cousins Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, but also through direct marriage of this obscure ducal family line marrying directly into other European royal families. And King George V of Great Britain changed the name of the royal house from Saxe-Coburg and Gotha to Windsor on July 17th of 1917, supposedly due to anti-German sentiment generated by World War I. Definitely have some thoughts about that one. They replaced the original royal houses with this one family. So, okay, so I've got this line going here from Morville, Cornwall, that goes all the way down to Louisiana. And as we saw, there was a train in the middle of nowhere, still there. And there's this train down here in the Louisiana swamps. I'm thinking that this powerful area for the original advanced Moorish civilization got blasted through a ley line with tremendous energy artificially running through it, and this caused the land here to be ruined and sunk. This makes me wonder if what we are told about the sinking of Atlantis took place much more recently than what we've been led to believe in our historical narrative. There are ruined trains found along the alignment like these, and what comes to my mind is like a scenario of the day the Earth stood still. It's like kaboom, and then whatever was happening at that moment in time just stopped. Is what I'm getting. And I'm sure there's more examples of trains in the middle of nowhere. This is just, these were just some examples. I found the first one in my research of the Pine Barrens, and then I was watching a little video clip of a little exploration trip into the swamps of Ascension Parish in Louisiana, where there's a lot of swamps there. What are swamps anyway? Probably more ruined land. And that popped up.
Oh wow! There you go, Mariah. There's your train.
It was. Wait, wasn't it engine 38? Is that what it was?
And I sent you the video.
I know.
Yeah. There it is.
I'm so excited. I'm waiting.
She has been. I'll take a picture of her with it. She's been wanting to see this train for such a long time. All right.
If all this sounds crazy, remember the old saying, truth is stranger than fiction. We have been taught and told egregious lies from cradle to grave to get us to the world we live in today. Why don't you go ahead and I'll stop sharing so we can talk about your findings of the Hamptons and that just whole idea that the name Hampton keeps popping up.
Okay, so you should be able to see the screen now. So what I'm doing is showing you my findings regarding Aleister Crowley and some of the connections that Michelle has found out in the US and how that's connected to the UK, and especially his hometown of Leamington Spa, where he was actually born. So on his first slide, you can actually see that in this area here, marked by the square, is where Aleister Crowley was actually born. And this area directly in front of it, they call it what's known as Clarendon Square, which is actually a rectangle, not a square. And if you notice, it's got the cross shape running along the on this green belt of land. And it just so happens there's a ley line that's running directly where this line passes through, which runs through where his house was, where he was living in. And it just happens to be a short distance away a church called Holy Trinity. So that's no coincidence on there. And what I found is, in doing my research of Aleister Crowley, was the numbers 3, 6, and 9 kept on coming up quite frequently and a lot in the research that I was doing. And one of the main ones is that he was actually born in a house with the number 30. That was his house number he was actually born in. So we got the 3 on there. And his house was located approximately 0.4 miles away from a Midland oak tree, which is what I mentioned in a previous video regarding what marked the centre point of England historically. And looking back to the years that Aleister Crowley was born, adding up the numbers, especially when he was born, if you add up all the year numbers, it adds up to 21, and the year 1947 when he died adds up to 21 as well. And making it into a single number, it comes up to 3. And the number 21 will be significant in a couple of slides that I'm going to show you, because that correlates of a distance to some of the other features that we were mentioning earlier. And he died supposedly at the age of 72, which has got the number 9 again, surprisingly. And like I mentioned, his house is on a square, and the area that he's living in is called Clarendon Square. And that links to the Masonic symbol of the square and compass, because in the slide I'm going to show you, I've joined the connections of all the 3 centre points of England that were classified as being a central point, one being the oak tree, Midland oak tree, one being Rugby that we mentioned before, and one being in Meriden as well. And with him living on the square, it again symbolises that square and compass symbol, which is the Masonic symbol, which symbolises Pythagoras and the sign of perfection with the numbers 3 and 4. And one of the things that obviously came to mind as soon as Michelle mentioned to me about the Minotaur and the experiment that Aleister Crowley did in the Minotaur. I remember reading in a book, and I've got this from this book here, which are the ley lines of the UK by David R. Carron with Anne C. Silk, which basically explains how the Mason secret societies, the builders, use the ley lines in their construction. And one of the things I remembered reading about was a ley line that runs from the Mount Carmel in Israel, which is a volcanic mountain, and it runs through some of the main central points, specific centers of Greece, such as the Delphi temple, which is classified as the Oracle Center, which is very significant. And then it leads all the way up through to Menotal, where Aleister Crowley put his son through that megalithic stone structure through the circle on that, which Michelle mentions about the experiment as part of the ley line experiment. And one thing that links this back as well, because I've noticed that the locations seem to be referring to the Greek gods. And as we can see on here, from a section in that book I've just shown you, it mentions certain things like Delphi being the Oracle Center, and things like Athena and Apollo, which are Greek gods and goddesses, which are quite significant. And it's no coincidence that in his hometown of Leamington Spa, in the industrial estate, not far from where I mentioned the standing stone was, where the ley line runs through, the street names in this industrial estate are referring to the Greek goddesses and the monuments, such as Delphi Close that we've got here, the Oracle Center, as I mentioned in the previous one, Athena Court, Athena Drive, and Apollo Way. So why would you use those specific names in this location, far away from it, if there wasn't some kind of energetic connection, which this happens to be the hometown of where Aleister Crowley was born. And because Michelle mentioned the laboratory as well in New York, in Long Island, this place is actually a home to the CV laboratory, the largest laboratory for testing COVID in the UK, and that's named after Rosalind Franklin. Is that a coincidence? Because I'm sure Michelle has come up with that name, Rosalind Franklin, as well. So do you want to explain about Rosalind Franklin, Michelle, if you've had any experience in your research on that?
What comes to mind is, wasn't she the person that actually discovered the DNA sequence? Is what I'm recalling, and that her work got taken over by other people that got credit
nominated for the work that she was doing with the DNA research and work that she was actually conducting. Mm-hmm. And is it no surprise that with what happened, in the year 2000, which what people believe is another form of manipulation of DNA, this particular laboratory is located in the hometown of where Aleister Crowley was born? Is that a coincidence? They could have called that laboratory anything else. Why name it after a scientist who was dealing with DNA changes and stuff? There's no such thing as a coincidence. And here we've got the triangular formation of the ley lines connecting the three centres of England, which I mentioned about the square and compass. This is the triangle confirmation of that. And we can see that at the point where the Midland Oak is, the ley lines form a perfect 90-degree triangle, which is also referred to as a 3-4-5 triangle. And one thing to notice as well is the distances between each of these three centres in the UK. So the distance from the Midland Oak Tree to Rugby, for example, when I've checked the distance, all the numbers added up with the distance and the angles that the energy line flows, all have a 3, 6, or a 9. So as you can see here, with the distance in miles, adding up all the digits adds up to 9, and the degrees of the angle where the ley line flows adds up to 3, 6, or 9. And that happens for each of these centres that have been identified from here. So again, is that a coincidence? Because the math never lies. 1 + 1 will always be 2. Why do they name these centres of England at different times as being a different central point. You know, there was a reason for it, because you could only have one true centre point of England. Why have three different ones? And it looks like there must have been some kind of purpose behind it. And if we were to extend the ley line running from Midland Oak going in the south westerly direction, a short distance, just over 2 miles, it runs through a neighbouring town of Warwick. And this again has a connection with Aleister Crowley, because it was proven that Warwick is the home of Warwick Castle, which is one of the historical medieval castles. And it was proven that in the late 1880s, Aleister Crowley held some of his occult magic and seances at this particular castle, because there is a vortex at this castle and an array of various ley lines running at this point. So that's the kind of places he did his occult magic, because of the energy of the overall place. And it was proven, as you can see on here, in sealed letters that were discovered about him actually doing that work. So it's proven evidence. And linking the other things onto this as well, this site is located approximately 3.4 kilometers, which is just over 2 miles from his house. And the numbers 3 and 4 kept on coming up quite a lot, as we've mentioned in the video I did with Chad regarding Oxford and the significance of it. And exactly not far from the castle, there's a church, a significant church with a cathedral type tower that's called St. Mary's. And that basically, the ley line passes through that church. And if you go to the top of the tower, it is said that you can view the Malvern Beacon, the reflection of the sun over the Malvern Beacon on mantle from a distance of 34 miles. The exact distance is 34 miles. And from that church tower, you can actually see the reflection of the sun at certain times as a light on the horizon, reflecting that light of the beacon. And again, that was where Aleister Crowley went to college. So, you know, is that not perfectly aligned energetically for a reason, and why he went to college on there, for example, as well? And one other final point on this as well, in 2007, Warwick Castle, as long as the other main theme parks such as Alton Towers, Fort Park, Madame Tussauds, the Waxworks, was bought by a company called Blackstone for just under £6 million or $7.5 million US. And is it no coincidence that, you know, Michelle mentioned later on regarding the Black Stone in Mecca? Is that no coincidence? And by buying this castle and all the other famous tourist attractions, the theme parks that Chad has mentioned before, you know, owning all that land where they're located for a reason by an organisation that's called Blackstone, which is in effect the same company as the Black Rock, which owns all the media and you know, numerous other corporations in the world, which are one of the controllers of who control the society. So it just goes to show how, you know, we can find all these things and it links absolutely everything together.
And tell them what it's called, Dad. Tell them what the pass is called that you can get from them. What's it called? It's called the Merlin Pass. You can get a Merlin Pass.
You can get a Merlin Pass to go to all these sites, which entitles you to a year's free entry. If you pay a certain fee, I think it's about £150 a year or something, you can get a pass where you get free entry onto it. And one thing I've noticed as well is regarding Aleister Crowley, is according to Wikipedia, he was actually born as Edward Alexander Crowley. So where did that name Alistair come from? You know, when that wasn't his birth name. You know, there's not much evidence out there to suggest where it comes from. And then I had an intuition thought where I automatically thought of Alistair as being a place in the UK called Leicester, a city in the UK called Leicester. And Crowley is also another city in England. So I thought, well, hang on a minute. Well, that seems a bit strange because it sounds like Leicester and Crawley in the UK. Is there a ley line that runs between these two cities? And to my surprise, I've already, without realising it, a few months back, discovered that there was actually a ley line running all the way from Leicester which starts from just north of Leicester through Loughborough University. And Loughborough University in the UK, one of its specialities is sports. So with Chard mentioning with sports centres and stuff like that, this ley line, which shares a similar kind of name, Leicester, Alistair, runs from that sports college in this particular ley line, which travels through the town of Northampton and Selsey Forest. Because in the previous video, we mentioned that there was a ley line connecting the rugby in the US to the rugby in the UK, and extended down, it runs through and crosses over in a place called Selsey Forest, which I explained in the previous video, which again has some, well, we did have at times some pine trees in there growing. So you've got the Pine Barren connection and the Royal Hunting Ground. So you've got the rugby ley line connecting into this centre place in Selsey Forest, again, linking to trees, as well as this line that connects Leicester to Crowley. You know, that's no coincidence. And again, further down there, it goes through Milton Keynes. And one of the places of note is in the Greater London, it passes through a town called Hampton. So we have that Hampton connection again. So it makes you wonder, you know, what did Alistair want to name himself after this particular ley line for some kind of reason? Like Michelle's mentioned, the connections with Hampton in the US, and then it goes all the way down to the Brighton Pavilion, which is what Michelle has identified in the previous video as well. You know, is that all a coincidence, or is that specific for some kind of reason to fuel the Earth grid, for example?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, and that's a good lead-in to what we're
shared.
going to present as evidence for the reverse engineering of the grid system from what was originally positive
Yes.
to negative purpose. So
Yeah,
I'm just going
to how these sites are connected on it later on. So
okay, well, I'm just going to finish up with one thought about Aleister Crowley before we move into the next part. He was supposed to have died on December 1st of 1947. And there's been an important, it's important to note that it's long been rumored that Barbara Bush, the wife of President George H.W. Bush, was his daughter. I'm going to put out there, what if Aleister Crowley and Barbara Bush were actually one and the same? As you can, it's the, going thing is that she was related to him, but I think there's probably good evidence that maybe they were actually the same person.
This is a common story, Michelle, across the board. I believe what you're saying. It's a common story. For some weird reason, this transgender and playing multiple roles is quite prevalent, and it seems to be going back to around, if not before that time, and it's in everything now.
And I actually verbalized that for the first time. I was sending Adam an email. I had suspected that for a while, but if you look at Barbara Bush's neck in pictures, she's got like a massive neck behind those pearls. The day that I verbalized that for the first time to Adam, something came up on my Twitter feed, and it was a picture of Barbara Bush and George H.W. and W. And the caption was, Alistair Bush and his two daughters. So if you want to kind of throw that piece into the mix as well, nothing would surprise me, like what you're saying, Chad. It's so weird what's going on with this.
Crazy.
And actually, I'm hearing and seeing possibility that it's way prevalent in the elite class. It's like they love to pull it over on us, and affects a lot of people. And they make you think that it's what it's not. So that's that happens quite a bit. Now let's look at our findings with respect to the reverse engineering of the Earth's original energy grid system into a control matrix. First, here's an approximately 18-minute video which contains clips from Chad's sports circuit and Squatterman videos, which included clips from my circuit board Earth video and a clip from Adam's video on Do Modern Day Cities Harness the Same Power as Ancient Sites?
Recently I've been looking into ley lines and the Earth's grid, and I came across some fantastic patterns inside of stadiums and fields, which I believe answer the questions to how they are harnessing the energy from stadiums. Firstly, to explore this, we need to explore Michelle Gibson's circuit board Earth theory and look at the circuit board Earth and what it may represent, to see what the stadiums and the pitches may be doing in terms of harnessing energy for the circuit itself. We were looking into meanings, definitions and symbols to see if the stadiums and pitches represent or actually are batteries on the grid system itself, powering something larger that we are unaware of. The positive and negative forces of the home and away sides, cheering and creating tension. What are we really doing at football matches? And then finally, we'll look at the game in a philosophical manner and what hidden truths are hidden in football and other games, to stadiums and pitches not only representing the universe and life itself, but also being harnessed as a battery.
I think we are being told in our everyday language what the function was of specific infrastructure on the Earth, which was arranged as a circuit board for the once free energy generating electromagnetic grid system of the ancient advanced civilization all over the surface of the Earth, and which I believe existed up until recent times. We are still using much of the enduring and sophisticated infrastructure of this advanced civilization in the present day. The sport of racing uses the word circuit in the following ways: the course over which races are won, the number of times the racers go around the track, an established itinerary of racing events involving public performance. And in bicycle racing, a circuit race is a mass start road cycle race that consists of several laps of a closed circuit, where the length of the lap is slightly longer each time. Electrical circuit definitions include a closed path in which electrons from a voltage or current source flow, and includes devices that give energy to the charged particles the current is comprised of, such as batteries and generators. Devices that use current, like lamps, electric motors, and computers. And the connecting wires or transmission lines. An electronic circuit is a complete course of conductors through which current can travel.
I've begun looking at a battery, realising and obviously knowing that the negatives at the bottom and the positives at the top, visualising a ladder climbing between the positive and the negative at the bottom, which would represent the 9 realms, us being the middle realm, which would be the perfect balance between positive and negative duality. And then when I turn the battery, it gave me the realisation that pitches and stadiums could be harnessing this type of technology. When I started to draw the lines from side to side, corner to corner, following basic geometry, it created a natural pattern of pyramids, which space between 9 lines within a pyramid, the 7 in the middle to me representing the spectrum of the rainbow, and also the 9 on each side creating a positive and negative vortex, as you can see highlighted by the blue and red. We also know magnets to work in this way with a positive and a negative spectrum, and obviously with the home and the away, teams and fans, players and all of the crowd creating a vortex. When I checked other geometric patterns across other courts like basketball, it was the same. It was the same for cricket. It was the same for tennis, and the list goes on. One of the funny finds was when I was looking at the pattern, I watch a lot of films and I could see the motion Picture Association of America symbol fitting perfectly inside the grid. Onto stadiums, which obviously house the pitches. I was trying to think of ways which the energy from the grid on the pitch could be harnessed through the stadium, and then looking at the stadium layout I could see obvious spots where VIPs sat, so I formatted a design which the energy potentially could come from the pitch through the stadium harnessed into a particular area. Obviously I'm not sure if it's this design at all. The batteries have outlets, and if the stadium wasn't powering itself or people within it to harness them, it would be powering something on the outside. But a theory I have come across is that the energy which is created within the stadium through the matches is then amplified to the surrounding areas of potentially up to hundreds of miles, whether that being positive or negative energy. I'm suggesting to you that stadiums and pitches are being harnessed as some type of battery.
Wouldn't it stand to reason that those behind the reset when setting up the new world would take advantage of the super science of the different types of circuits in the Earth's grid system in order to harness their inherent power to enhance performance at sporting events, and in the process making lots of money at highly charged, prestigious gaming and betting venues? In regards to similar configurations found in different cities, in Cincinnati, Ohio, the city's professional sports stadiums are downtown next to the Ohio River. And interestingly, they are situated on the river exactly like they are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Same seemed to be true in London and surrounding areas. Then looking into Olympic stadiums, the same pattern seemed to be formed. The 4 triangles, as you can see, the 7 or 9 rays forming through the middle, and then the positive and negative, each represented by 9 lines running around the pattern, equaling 18 in total. Looking at the words and definitions, all sports take place on a playing field or a sports field. The word field reminds me of energy field or electromagnetic field. Looking at a football field, basketball court or any other sports field, we can see how it creates positive and negative energy and itself could become a field. So what is the objective or sport or of the game? Sport generally pertains to any form of competitive physical activity or game, but in particular, because I'm obviously English, I'm going to be looking at the sport football and what the aims of that game may be. Obviously in football consists of 11 players on each team within a certain dimensions within a pitch, and the aim of the game within 90 minutes is to score as many goals as you can, more than the other team, to beat them, in a nutshell. You know, guys, there's a lot I could go through here. The referee, how he's the enforcer of the laws of the game. We could look at the balls and the dimensions of the balls and what they're made of and how similar they are to Earth and all the geometrical sacred shapes within them. Bear in mind, the definition and the objective of the game is to score a goal or a hoop. Also, bearing in mind that the definition of a bar was a gate, my thought process started to move on to what type of energy is being used on a pitch, which is kinetic energy. Once I started to search the term kinetic energy related to football, startling developments occurred. If you can put 2 and 2 together, you can surely see how this could already be taking place on football fields with the natural geometry and the pattern that I've found. And you can obviously see 4 pyramids, 4 triangles. If you were to imagine pulling those triangles up from the top in the middle of the centre of the pitch, you would actually form a pyramid. When imagining the pyramid and then seeing the stadium around the pyramid as well, straight away Stargate came to mind. As we discovered with the definition of a bar, could the pitch, the stadium and the spectators combined together all be acting as some form of gate? You know, just looking at the cover of Stargate, the circle surrounding the top you can see as a particle accelerator of the stadium which sits upon the pitch. Just squash the pyramid down from the top and it would easily form the pitch and the 4 triangles that I've shown. The next video was sent to me by a friend, Adam. I can't really make top and tail of the video, it's so complex, but ultimately one of the patterns matches the design on the pitch, and it also reminds me of Spider-Man. As we know, films hide so much, but even sacred geometry and potentially the keys to Stargates are being hidden within movies. Everything the characters in Marvel have the potential to do is a potentiality in science. One of the other things that stuck out to me on the diagram was the 3, 6, 9. Obviously if you add 3, 6 and 9 together it would sum to 18. And if you were to divide 18 by 2 it would bring down to 9. And Tesla said the keys to the universe were 3, 6, 9. Within a football match you've got the 18-yard box, the 9-yard box. The pattern that I found of 18 lines, 9 on each side. Shakespeare, the world was a stage. To natural philosophers of Newton's era, it was a mechanical clock. Physicists of the 19th century viewed reality more like a steam engine. Today, scientists regard nature as a computer. Through the works of people such as Marcel Gibson, we start to look at the world as a circuit board. It's undeniable in terms of the imagery how much the world looks like a circuit board, how it operates and its systems. We are mainly looking at the power generating facilities within the circuit board, and through the last video you could see the pattern and the grid that was found within stadiums, pitches, which is being used as an energy harvesting facility, which, just like in the films Monsters Inc., where when the children are scared and scream, their screams are harnessed and turned into energy, it's the exact same principle for the opposing teams cheering, roaring, screaming. That energy is captured through sound vibration and transferred into harnessed energy. Violetting out the last video, we had comments referring to Squatterman and the pattern very much matching mine on the field, and a whole range of other symbolic representations such as the Holy Grail, the Scarab Beetle, the Spider, the Last Supper, just to name a few. Also, theatres and churches seem to play a role in either power generating or influencing people through song, chants, plays, etc.
In this image we can see the amphitheatre, which is in Campbell Park. This amphitheatre is used for numerous various types of public events. If you look at the Google Earth image on the left, it seems to be quite strategically positioned next to an amphitheatre shape office block with a copper type roof, as you can see from the green colour on the image. Copper happens to be a highly conductive material. Is that coincidence that right next to the amphitheatre they've built office accommodation with a copper roof? Is that normal? The second and the largest amphitheatre in Milton Keynes is the National Bowl. This is located a short distance to the south of the city centre. It is an open-air grass amphitheatre with a capacity of over 65,000 100,000 people and has seen world-class performances from Queen, David Bowie, Robbie Williams, Bruce Springsteen, Take That, and the Prodigy. The National Bowl was formerly called the Milton Keynes Bowl between the years 1979 and 1992, when it became known as the National Bowl. The bowl site was formerly a clay pit or quarry. In 1971, the first steps were made to develop the bowl, with approval granted for tipping the surplus soil at the bowl site from the road building work in the development of the new city of Milton Keynes. In 1973 saw the creation of a huge horse-shaped mound surrounding an area which could be utilised as an arena to host major public attended events. This is based on the idea of the Hollywood Bowl, again connection to the US. In 1977, earthworks completed and open-air concerts were discussed. This great venue hosted a galaxy of world-class entertainers, including Bon Jovi, Eminem, Green Day, Linkin Park, Oasis, Take That, and the Foo Fighters, and Robbie Williams. The first advertised concert to be held at the Milton Keynes Bowl was on the 8th of September 1979. This concert was called Soul in the Bowl, and it featured artists like the chairman of the board, Desmond Dekker, and the Aces, Geno Washington, and the Ram Jam Band. Ancient amphitheatres were known to harvest sound energy. Could the headline in a previous news article in the previous slide, Scream for Me Milton Keynes, and the first ever concert being called Soul in a Bowl, be a play with words or an indication of something a bit more sinister?
Right. So anyway, I just wanted to put that in for context about what we're talking about with the energy harvesting and what we put together so far. In the energy harvesting occurring in places like sports stadiums and places like amphitheaters and concert venues. Two things before I answer the question: where is our energy going and to whom? That I asked at the end of the video. One thing is sharing this information from One thing is sharing this information from Adam and the numerology of the numbers 369, like he was talking about. The other thing that I mentioned previously that Crowley called the Baphomet Father Mithras, the cubical stone, which was the corner of the temple. Was he referring to an actual physical location? I think he was. And this location relates directly to the subject of this section on the reverse engineering of the grid system into a control matrix. As a result of all of this work on energy harvesting in the grid system, the three of us have been doing separately and together, I emailed the question, where is our inner chi going, to both of you, particularly thinking of Chad's work on stadiums turning into portals in sports circuit. Almost immediately, I remembered hearing that Saturn was connected to the control matrix, but I had nothing to hang it on before. So I searched for Saturn in the matrix, and this is what came up. So the idea that there's a connection to Saturn and that it's not a good one for us. And you were saying, Chad, that there's a connection between Satan and Saturn.
Satan for me is Santa. Santa's a Satan, a version of that. Saturn, when they're talking about Saturn, a lot of the times it's a name for that also. And just by looking at that picture that you've got on the screen in front of you, you can see the ram's horns, can't you?
That's what I thought when I first saw it. So it's the idea that Saturn's being used to pump out reversal violet ray plasma light, as it says here, and that this is the distortion that generates reversal plasmas and reversal violet light on our planet. And that these reversal plasmas are designed to ignite and feed the demon seed that exists in the shadow selves or negative forms of the masses. So again, I had nothing to hang this on until our research started to come together.
Can you see the Eye of Ra? Go back, sorry. Can you see the Eye of Ra there as well? Can you imagine the all-seeing eye at the top of that pyramid? How it would replicate the eye? You know, it's just another way of hiding that. And the way that comes down a lot of the time in their art is the eye with its rays. So it's showing the manipulation, isn't it? The harvesting and the feeding of that energy through this top point.
Starting to come together. This was a picture I took at the Coricancha in Cusco, Peru, which I visited on a tour of Peru in May of 2018. I was looking back on past research that I've done. This is one of the pictures I took when I was there, a beautiful painting of the Sequoia system. The Sequoia, of which the Coricancha was the center, was a huge scheme of sacred geometry and involved at least 42 ley lines radiating out from the center. The literature that's available on it suggests that it referred to the Inca Empire, partitioned into 4 divisions, and the boundary line separating the 4 also radiated out from the Coricancha. But a chronicler of the time of the conquest of Peru, Bernabe Kobe, wrote that the sequoias were conceived as straight lines diverging radially from the Coricancha, the symbolic center of the world, and extending out into the cosmos, which sounds alike to me a lot more than the Inca Empire. Cusco is called the navel of the world, and the Coricancha, a breathtakingly beautiful megalithic masterpiece, the navel of the navel. Coricancha is said to mean in English something like golden enclosure, and it was at one time. It was covered in gold, but the gold's long gone. Then there's the issue of the original Jerusalem being in Peru. It was called Jerusalem or Jerusalem, and said to be built by the Egyptians as their capital, and is where they laid the cord. So was that the Sequoia system? The Temple of Heru in Egyptian, the language is Medu Neter, is Peru, 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 PR-HERU. Also sounds like hero, as in Camp Hero on Montauk Point. Then the Kaaba and Mecca came to mind. The Kaaba, literally the cube, is a cubical structure. It is not only the location for the Hajj pilgrimage for Muslims to visit and revere in person, joining a massive procession that walks around the structure in the same direction, it is also the direction Muslims around the world face for prayer. And you can literally see in the name Kabbalah and Cabal. No, you play around with it. The Kaaba is covered by a silk and cotton veil known as the Kiswa. A veil? The veil? Is this meant to keep us from seeing the reality of the world we live in and keep us from seeing the deceptions? Embedded in the eastern corner of the Kaaba is the Blackstone, considered to possibly be a meteorite, but the origin of the Blackstone is not known with certainty. Again, at the end of Adam's last PowerPoint presentation, he talked about Blackstone and Blackrock and asked, is there a connection?
By the power of Grayskull.
And on that note, I'm going to stop sharing. So Adam can talk about his findings. Is it possible that the positive Coricancha was the anchor for the original Earth grid system, and that it was reverse engineered so that the Kaaba and Mecca became the anchor of the negative matrix?
Yeah, so Michelle had a good point to me when she came up to me and asked me that question. You know, are those two center points anchors in a world, and are they actually connected? And again, it was no surprise in Michelle's intuition that there is a ley line connecting both these centers of the Earth, and the way they're connected is a significant major dragon line or ley line connecting the two centers together. So in this presentation, I will explain exactly, you know, what it looks like and how that also connects with the cosmos as well. So that's got that link as well. But with the connection to the some other centers, once I've done the Milton Keynes video, Michelle actually did come back to me with the connecting both the Karnak in Egypt to the Karnak in Brittany to Milton Keynes, forming a triangular ley line connection. And then just the other day, she mentioned to me that the ley line connecting the Karnak, where the Karnak temple is, to Milton Keynes, extended out, actually passes through the town of Leamington Spa, which is the birthplace of Aleister Crowley. And as we can see on here, we've extended the ley line from connecting the Karnak in Egypt to Milton Keynes to the three center points of the UK that are classified as center points of the UK. And Michelle was completely right. The energy line actually travels just to the north of Royal Leamington Spa. And as we connect the two centers, this ley line actually goes through the center of the triangular formation of the ley lines through to the center point at the top, which is Meriden, which was classified as another center of England. So is it no surprise that that line is perfectly aligned with these three central points on the grid? So that is, to me, clear evidence that certain locations are connected deliberately, aligned with each other, and use energy lines, ley lines, to transfer that energy that's being harvested to keep that circuit of energy fueling whatever the intention of fueling that energy is. So to me, that is clear evidence that all center points are actually connected. And again, extending that particular ley line out, which connects from Egypt, it actually goes through to the south of the Isle of Man, which connects again through to that ley line that connects the rugby in America to the rugby in England. Is that a coincidence? And why are they both crossing at the point in the Isle of Man? You know, what could have been going on in the Isle of Man at some time in the history? Because I know Michelle mentioned that, you know, she suspects there was some not so nice things going on in the Isle of Man. Is that right, Michelle?
Actually, the Channel Islands, but
Sometime?
you know, it could have been any of these places.
Mm-hmm. And again, why do these lines cross on the Isle of Wight? You know, is that a coincidence? Just looking at the ley line connection between the two centers that Michelle has mentioned, Cusco in Peru and Mecca in Saudi Arabia. The ley line that connects both the centers through is the main energy line, or the dragon line, which connects the northern hemisphere with the southern hemisphere. So it's connecting both those hemispheres together, and the energy is actually fed from Cusco into Mecca. So Mecca is like the the feeding center of that energy that's being brought into it. And that's not including the energy from the millions of Muslims praying around the world facing in that direction. All that energy from the prayers is obviously being fed into that energetic center, which is Mecca.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided to check the distance of the ley line between Peru and Mecca, and it happens to be 7,950 miles. And then we also get the connection of the 21 again, which when we looked at the previous slide earlier on, we noticed that when Aleister Crowley was born and when he died, all the numbers added up to 21, which create a single digit of 3. Is that another coincidence between these two energy centers? And again, from the Cusco in Peru to Mecca, the energy line heads at an angle of 72 degrees, which again is the 9. So we're seeing those 3, 6, 9 connections yet again. And now if we look specifically at the Cusco, we can see from this Google Earth image that Cusco is actually located on top of a mountain. And if we look to the bottom right-hand side of the screen, we can see that the elevation is just under 12,000 feet above sea elevation. So it's at a much higher point. And then if we look at the Mecca, we can see that the where the Kaaba is and the center for the pilgrimages and the worship, it seems to be in an elevation that's forming like a bowl, like an inverted dome. Is that coincidence? And to me, looking at from an aerial image, this looks to me like it's similar to that of a sports stadium. Wouldn't you agree, Chad? When you look at it, with the center point being like the sports field of the stadium.
Definitely, 100%. And the
being surrounded on it, is that a reason?
The outer ring as well, that's eye-catching, isn't it? It's almost like some old technology, some ancient type of technology.
First time I saw it, this reminds me of like a crashed spaceship. So the Star Trekkies out there would say, this looks quite similar to the structure of the Starship Enterprise. It looks quite similar, and it seems to be going down in elevation, as you can see from here. And Mecca is at an elevation, if you look to the bottom right of the screen, at just under 950 feet. So then I was quite thinking, hang on a minute, this connects with the domes and the basins. So I came across this image from Keele University. And if we look at here, because we mentioned about Derbyshire, the work Michelle was doing, and how she was connected to that place in order to do the research. And from this image here, we can see that the geological features of Derbyshire, they refer it to as being a dome. And then just to the south, where we've got most of the Midlands, it seems to be referring to a basin. And I thought, oh, hang on a minute, there must be something more to it than this. So I looked at the keys to this particular map and noticed the anticlines. So if we look at Derbyshire where the dome is, it seems to indicate anticlines. So I thought, oh, it's a term I've not come across. So let's have a look at the definition of anticlines. And as you can see, it's a geological structure similar to that of an arch shape, geological feature under the ground. So is that why they're referring it to as a dome? Because if you've got an arch shaped geological feature on the ground, does it not create the shape of a dome? And then I thought, oh, hang on a minute, that's an anticline, but what is a syncline, which is where you can see the keys on the basins. And that's basically an inversion of the dome. So that's the equivalent of the bowl. So then that made me think, well, hang on a minute, you've got Cusco in Peru, which is at a higher elevation point. So that could represent the dome, and the Mecca as the basin, because it's a much lower elevation, and it seems to be inverted in the center where the place of, where they use as the place of worship, for example. So is that not another connection? And then I decided to have a bit of a closer look with the ley line connecting the two centers, and noticed on the African continent, as well as the Saudi Arabia, is there seems to be 6 soccer stadiums, English football stadiums, are located along this alignment. So is that a coincidence that they've put soccer stadiums along this particular alignment? Again, harvesting energy. So I thought, you know, is that the same on the other continent in South America? And again, I've identified some soccer stadiums which are aligned along this specific ley line. And you think, well, there's only just a few random scattered about. But if you look at the population of these areas, especially like in the Amazon, a lot of these areas are uninhabited. So you wouldn't find football stadiums in a lot of these places. But the areas, cities which are inhabited would possibly have those. So why are all the stadiums associated along this ley line? And like Chad was saying, seeing them as a way of harvesting the energy. So again, feeding the energy from Cusco, which would be seen as the positive energy. When I say positive, I mean in the sense of like electrical circuit, you've got positive connection, like a battery, and then the negative, not in necessarily good or evil, but that's seen as being the input energy, the positive energy linked to the higher consciousness, the higher dimensions. And then you've got the Cusco, which potentially is seen as the negative connection on the energetic side, on the electrical circuit side. So that's the conclusion that I've came up with. And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, that ley line I identified looks similar to what's known as the celestial sphere.
Yeah.
And the celestial sphere is what we can see on here. I know it's got the image of the globe as being globe shaped, but this can be used for the principle as the flat earth, if that's what people believe as well, because we can see that there's the spherical sphere says there's an imaginary sphere around the planet, which they use to measure the location and the positioning of the stars, where the distance isn't important. And you sort of think, hang on a minute, the distance is important. So why are they saying the distance isn't important? Are they lying to us? Because this is seen as the equivalent of the Earth, of the flat Earth. If you've got the shield around the Earth, you know, creating the dome around the flat Earth, this is exactly the same as that. So could they be telling us that the Earth is actually flat? And if we bring the image back of the line, we can see it looks very similar just by repositioning the position of the globe of what we're seeing here. And then it led me to the conclusion regarding the domes is the top half of the sphere. We can see it's got 90 degrees, which is the positive 90 to the high dimensions and the dome. And then we've got the basin, which is the inverted dome towards the bottom. And that only goes up to a degree of 60 degrees, which is a symbol, number 6, for the lower dimensions, for example. And this particular ley line goes through both the northern and the southern hemisphere. But what they appear to have done is reverted that by having the center of Cusco being in the southern hemisphere, and one in Saudi Arabia and Mecca being in the northern hemisphere. So what they've done is inverted that system. And this is scientific proof, because this is a model that they use, like I say, to identify the position of the stars as well. So to me, that represents that it's a connection to the cosmos. And both these sites are specifically aligned with whatever happens to be aligned with the cosmos. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of these centers is aligned with Saturn, like Michelle was going on about the Saturn-Moon connection. So it'd be quite interesting if anybody's into their astrology, if they can look into this and find out, you know, if these are actually allocated to these certain points, like Saturn, for example, as confirmation. And there's also another connection with the ley line, connecting the other centers of the Bolinas line. Because I know Michelle has mentioned it in the previous videos about the Bolinas line, which is also traveled along the Bolinas line, which is the main ley line that goes through the spine of the UK, basically. Because you've got the St. Michael's ley line, which goes from the southwest to the east of the country, And then you've got the famous Venus line, which goes through the whole spine of the country from the Isle of Wight through to Scotland. And then I came across this connection because not far from Leamington Spa, it travels through Stratford-upon-Avon, which is William Shakespeare's birthplace. And just a short distance, a couple of miles away from Stratford, there is this place called Welcome Hills. And it is said that there is a lost medieval village of a village called Welcome, which is now actually buried under the hotel of Welcome Hills, which is also a golf course. And this ley line connects to the three ley lines that connect the three centres of the UK. And just next to this location where this hotel is now, there is a memorial of an obelisk on top of a hill, which is dedicated to the work of a politician, and who was also one of the largest landowners of the Welcome Hills in the late 1800s. And as Michelle and Chad have mentioned in a previous video, with the structures of the obelisks being a memorial for some of the people that they supported and worshipped, that's built on that location for a specific reason. And then I came across this article by someone called Richard Morris, which was an archaeologist, and he'd done some study regarding the Welcome Hills, allocating the medieval field system, mapping the ridges and the furrows in that area to try to locate this lost village of Welcome. And they could not find anything on it, and they've had strong suggestions to say that this lost village is probably buried under what is now the hotel and what is the golf course. And to me, that makes perfect sense, because one of the biggest landowners of the Welcome's Hills was a notorious family called the Coombs family. And it says here that in 1602, William Shakespeare actually purchased 120 acres from a William Coombe, who was a wealthy lawyer and also the mayor of the near town of Warwick. But then leaving it in the family and the family lines, a later relative, another William Coombe, was actually, it says on the thing here, he was basically member of the Masonic societies, and also, you know, members of the councils as well. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to build an enclosure of the area, which he wasn't allowed to do, and he led to the demise of the village of Welcome. Because as we can see, that he wanted to create that enclosure. So we had the enclosures, as Chad mentioned in the previous video, regarding the enclosures of the deer parks, for example. That's what he wanted to try and create, some kind of enclosure, enclosing that space. But for what reason? And it says here that the tenants that were farming on the land, he actually imprisoned them, impounded all the pigs and sheep and cattle that they had. And it says here that he bought the land and houses. He depopulated the entire village. You know, to me, that sounds like he was some kind of tyrant. And it's certainly, the Coombs were definitely not a family you would like to come connection with, considering what they've done, and that law does not affect them. And the only way they get anything is by tyranny and stealing populations, and then destroying villages, and then burying them under the ground. So to me, this is evidence to prove that there are many villages going back historically that have been buried under golf courses, like Chad was saying, in order to suppress how the previous civilizations lived. Because if they had a society living on a free energy, would that be something that the controllers would want to suppress and hide and bury? Because of free energy is something that the Rockefellers, for example, would have been their worst nightmare. So this is something that has been going on for quite a long, not just in the UK, but the US. And if we were to draw a line of a 6-mile radius of Stratford-upon-Avon, there are numerous accounted written evidence of being several medieval villages which have been buried under the ground. And there's signages in certain areas which actually confirm that there was a medieval village on it. This is part of the harvesting, you know, that was going on from the people on it, so that the controllers can take over the land for their own purpose. So do you have any comments, guys?
Great work.
Right work.
And to your last point, Gary Biltcliffe in the Bolinas line talked about that because he and his partner, Carolyn, doused the entire line from the Isle of Wight, the Cossacks of the spine of Albion, on up to Foraid Head in Scotland where it exits, and found the middle of it is the Cygnus alignment with the Swan constellation, and then there's 2 great dragon lines that cross each other at 33 nodal points on its ways. It's like 33 vertebrae in our spines, and because they experienced this, they saw what was there. So like they would see a structure with a gallows on it, or evidence that there was some kind of ritual. But the point that comes to mind is that the Battle of Culloden took place on one of these energy lines, or on this energy line. And that was where the English defeated the Scottish, very powerful place. There's a lot of interesting things. Andrew Carnegie was born on the line. It goes right through the church that Shakespeare was buried in Stratford. Lots of other interesting bits. Carnarvon. The Carnarvon estate, and I'll have to send you some information on this. The Carnarvon that was with the discovery of King Tut's tomb. They're a family estate where I believe that Downton Manor is filmed. Their burial place is like right on this place. It might have been a nodal point or something, but it's like they wanted that connection for eternity with these powerful grid lines. And so I think the
controllers want to control the land and own the land, like I said, depopulating the village of Welcome, for example. They wanted that land for a specific reason, and it's not for that, as part of that energy grid system. Why else would they want the land and depopulate the village by doing, tyranny and, and theft, basically, of the population? They must have had something. They would not do anything if they haven't got an interest. And once you find out the reason, ask the question, what is the interest on it? What interest have they got? That's where you get led down a path of exactly how corrupt and how evil these controllers actually are.
Absolutely. And so they removed the grid from our collective awareness. They took it off maps. They left us longitude and latitude, but they took off the ley lines. And, it's the grids are real. I mean, this is real information, and it's very powerful. Just synchronicities and odd things happening. I mean, I did travel the Bolinas line years before I knew about it. I saw a picture in the Bolinas line book. It's like, I have to get that book called The Spine of Albion. And when I saw that picture, it's like, it was there. No knowledge that I was doing that. So there's a communication there when you tap into this grid that you get information in return. And I think there's a whole bunch of people that are just connected somehow. And we're all connected in different ways, but we definitely are. So there's information there to be gained when you tap into it. That's what we've been finding. So I've shared my presentation. So, that's our challenge and our direction. We move into love.
Definitely.
Knowing what we know.
Thanks for your time, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this.